All right, let's head over to the Zoom line where we have Mr. Warren Martin on the phone with us. I'm sorry, on the Zoom line with us. Date myself a little bit. I might as well say tape it as well instead of record it. Warren Martin, how you doing? Kansas strong. What's going on today?
Doing great, doing great. It's a good day, and we're just about to close out this old year, getting into a new year, and looking forward to 2025.
December 29th, episode 8 of Landman dropped on Paramount Plus. If you'd like to have a discount link, we have it available in the description below. Episode 8 titled Clumsy This Life. Of course, going into it, not sure what that meant. We find out throughout the episode, really, it revolved around Cooper and his young love interest and really starting to connect more and more. This slow burn, if you will, of a love interest is really taking the time to set the table. And at the end of the day, it seems to be kind of the love story there, Warren. It really does. It seems like there's a lot. I wrote down. Here's what I wrote down. Sorry to flip around here a little bit here, but the love story becoming deep and complex. So not only is it complex with all the inner workings of the deaths and the lawsuits, but they're making it deep, Warren. That's what I took away from this episode. Clumsy, this life is meant to be really more deep than it is flimsy. That's how I took it, Warren. How about you?
Yeah, I think I think you're right. I think that we talked about last episode. What was going to happen with this lawsuit, and was this lawsuit going to divide him and her? Was this lawsuit, I kind of threw out there that I think it's really going to come down between him and his father. And it kind of did, not so much directly with his father, but with definitely with the company as a whole. He ends up quitting his job to be able to defend her and to do what's right in her eyes. But I think there's also a little bit of foreshadowing there. She had a very long monologue in the midst of that scene where she talks about the complications with their relationship and where the relationship's going. And so I don't see this. I agree with you. I think the title completely refers to that relationship. I don't think it's going to be, even though everybody has acknowledged now on the show that they are truly in love, I don't think it's going to be a smooth road ahead for them, because she kind of alluded to several different paths that could happen going forward. And it'll be interesting to see which one the show takes.
So, getting back now to the actual start of the show, it starts out with the attorney, the young attorney, the Gen Z attorney, I guess she'd be, and Cooper, the young son of Tommy Norris, who's played by Billy Bob Thornton. Many people might remember Cooper from Justified. He played one of the Crow Boys from Florida. If you're wondering what other series have you seen him in, what I wrote down was really fantastic writing, and this was very much a social commentary right out of the gate by Tyler Sheridan. And the young attorney looks at Cooper and says, "I reject your truth. I'll think up my own truth, or I think I'll invent my own." That's what it was. I reject your truth. I think I'll invent my own. Warren, boy, that sent chills down my spine because that is. I've had exes that have done that to me, Warren. I mean, tell me a part of life that doesn't exist, really. Holy smokes! And to bring it into, you know, uh, settlements, if you will, and life or death, and oil companies, that sent a chill down my spine. But boy, that was real, Warren. That was real.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why most people cannot stand the legal profession. Is the reality is here in America we want justice to be blind. We want that's why Lady Liberty and Lady Justice always has a blindfold in the scales, is because we want it to be blind. But really, what we want is we want the court system to be blind, the judgment aspect of it to be blind. And where we've come to in our world today is we've come to the point where actually it's lawyers that are blind. Their goal is to win and not to lose. and to do whatever it takes to win, no matter what the cost. They don't consider human element. They don't consider stories. They don't, several times Tommy talks about how these are friends, and she objects to it every time he says that they're friends. And so I think that that's what most people cannot stand about the legal profession, is the fact that we want our judges to be blind. We don't want our attorneys to be blind. We want our attorneys to understand what we're going through. We want our attorneys to understand the situation and to fight in a fair way for what's best for us and our families and the people around us. And that's why last episode we talked, and I shared a story of how I've sat there and watched producers who were legally in battle with each other in the courts, had lawyers on both sides that I'm sure act just like this woman does in the show, but they chose to go out and sit around a table and try and work it out themselves because they understand the story. They understand what's in it, for what skin is in the game. And I think that was a classic scene showing how lawyers could care less a lot of times about the people that are involved in the case. Their only goal is to win the case.
I have two things that I took away from that as well, and your observations are very astute and very accurate, in my opinion. And I'd like to layer in a couple things and get your feedback on and get your reaction on, which is number one, the way that she approached that situation. It was very much blind justice, but also it was very competitive. It was very team like. Hey, you know what? We're going to win and you're going to lose. So competition really blurred justice, if you will. The other thing that I think it demonstrated is that, yes, all those other elements are there, but if I'm looking inward and trying to do some self reflection, if I'm an oil company and I'm watching Landman and trying to see what is the industry stereotyping and what are some things that I should self reflect on, that's one part I should self reflect on too, because it also represented the tribalism that exists in the oil and gas industry. So when you mix in the blind justice, which is kind of a blind allegiance, if you will, almost idol worship, and then you put in this competition, which can be extremely aggressive in a testosterone filled, high risk, high reward industry. But then you also mix in the tribalism that is very apparent in the oil and gas industry. That is a very dangerous mixture. And I thought she nailed it. I thought she nailed it. In fact, that was one of the better scenes in terms of her acting, which I dislike her character a lot, but I enjoyed that character right out of the gate.
Yeah. No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that, she was a character that was created to be despised, and she does it very, very well. But I agree with you wholeheartedly on everything that you just said, because all of those things exist. I believe they exist in every industry when you get close knit. Certainly they exist in the oil and gas industry, because while you got team players that are working on the same team when it comes to the government, when it comes to the EPA, when it comes to environmental issues, social presence, community involvement. We're all on the same team, but at the same time, we're competing against each other to gain wells. And you see that with what Ham is doing in his negotiations, trying to take over these new wells, and extremely favorable deal towards him to take over the wells because he knows the other guy's in financial trouble. And that's a lot of our industry too, is taking advantage of opportunities when they come your way in a very competitive way. So I agree with you wholeheartedly.
The juxtaposition, the M-Tex attorney, just a constant comic relief, also kind of a centering, if you will, a very much centering of common sense and observation, almost a morale. He's almost the morality compass, to be honest. He's the one who pointed out about the way that the two young lovers look at each other. This is not, no, this is a real deal. He's uncomfortable trying to manipulate the situation, and he's just a constant comic relief. Like you two need Navy SEAL level therapy. He said in the last episode, but that's what I find interesting about the M-Tex attorney is he plays the opposite to this one attorney, to where he's almost the most lovable, likable character in the whole thing. That and the housemate with the beard, I forget his name. The one who's always getting getting in the middle of Billy Bob and his wife in every which way possible. But a couple things I wrote down next. Interesting shift with the cartel to border control. Political hot button that came out of nowhere. All of a sudden now John Hamm's having a meeting with the governor. Very normal as far as the oil and gas industry, in my opinion. That's extremely normal. Or one of his staff, if not the governor himself, depending on the size of the donation check, I would imagine. But it was very interesting that they shifted it to border control because that term, border control, is a hot button issue. You might actually pick up some more viewers that way. But the deal that was cut, I mean, here you got this oil tycoon and the government, and now the army's involved, and they're, it seems pretty legit on the surface, but Warren, what was your thought of that whole scenario? Because I could see where the average person could walk away like, oh yeah, it's just corrupt and this is exactly how it's done. But on the other side of it, it's pretty preventative what they're trying to do. They're trying to solve a lot of little problems, and yeah, it's self special interest, but I don't know. It just shows it's almost like a sticky wicket type of a situation, and then of course the end we see what happens. But um, talk to me a little bit about that scene where the governor was introduced and the term border control and just how they negotiated the intangibles to solve some problems.
Yeah, I probably wrote more notes on that one scene than I did anything else in the show, because it's one of those scenes that some people might look at it and say that's completely unrealistic, and other people might look at it and say, oh, yeah, just like what you said, that yep, the fix is in, and these people get special priority and that kind of stuff. It's not uncommon for any major businessman, especially someone businessman or woman, any corporation that makes billions of dollars. It's not uncommon for them to have sit downs with the governor or other elected officials to talk about their concerns, their needs, and what they have. I thought what was interesting in that is I want to go back to what you were talking about in the last scene, because I think it plays into this scene. And in the last scene, you were talking about the West Texas lawyer. Now, the West Texas lawyer is that moral factor, kind of that that indifferent person that kind of brings back people back to a centered perspective a little bit more. And I think a lot of that has to do with Taylor Sheridan's trying to capture the spirit of West Texas. And West Texans tend to act differently. Growing up in that area and living in that area, the reality is you got to be careful what you say, because you got to look that person in the face the next day when you're walking down the street. There's nowhere to hide. It's not like the internet. It's not like living in a major city. You're going to face and deal and work with these people on a daily basis, and it changes how you interact with them, and it kind of does center you a little bit more. I think in Taylor Sheridan, he takes that a little bit too far with the governor. When the governor sits down, he really starts talking about this moral position that he holds as the governor, and really sets it up as our people and those people. And there's the right and the wrong. And he really kind of sets that up as we're just inherently that way, and that's the way God made us, and people don't change. And so you're either with us or you're against us. And I don't think that's really a West Texas attitude. Now, sometimes, yes, that does come across, but I think that was an extreme and a little bit too far when it comes to where we should be. But then you have that conversation that's taking place, and those conversations happen on a regular basis. I have sat down with governors and had conversations with governors. I've sat down with state representatives and state senators, congressional senators, congressional congressmen, and you have those conversations. And the conversations usually go, here's what I need. Yeah, but here's what our priorities are. Well, is there any way we can collaborate? Can we work together? And you try and find a way, because their goal is to meet the needs of their constituents. And in this situation, what they needed was they needed a military presence to dissuade the cartels from becoming more advanced. So what does he ask? Call in the National Guard. Now, most people might look at that and say, okay, calling in the National Guard, which actually he was calling in the Texas Guard, but calling in the National Guard, that would be an extreme situation to call in the National Guard. And in many cases, that would probably be true. If you were calling them in to do bombing runs like they did in the show, yes, that's extreme. That would make national news. However, the National Guard is a training organization. And my family, my in-laws, they have a ranch in West Texas, and it's a multi-thousand acre ranch in West Texas. It was the alternative site for what became Paladura Canyon out by Amarillo, and so it's very canyonous. There's a lot of canyons. It's one of the few places where you have hundreds of feet of elevation change within just a couple miles of each other. And so, years ago, we made a deal with the National Guard because the National Guard was trying to train and prepare to go into the Middle East, especially into Pakistan, Afghanistan, which is very canyonous areas. And so they needed an area where they could train on how to build roads and how to maintain roads through a very canyon littered area. And so we made an agreement with them because we needed roads taken care of on our property, and they needed to train by building roads. And so for several years, they would come in 2 or 3 times a year and they would train on building these roads and maintaining these roads for their training. So it's not unusual for the National Guard or for other military organizations to make collaborations to do their training when it's beneficial to both organizations and both sides that are there. We got what we needed, they got what they needed, and it didn't cost either of us anything. And that's a good deal. So I don't have a problem with him saying, hey, you want to come do training on my property out here? I could see where the National Guard would say, yeah, we'd be happy. We'd love to come out there and do some runs and do some recon. Now, the bombing, that's a whole different thing because those happen on bombing ranges. I don't know. Maybe it does. I don't know. I'm not a military expert, but I don't know of any stories where people have donated their land for the military to come out and bomb it.
Well, of course, it's classified. Why would you know that, right? I mean, come on now. But it all, if you're going to have some Hollywood cartel moments, the National Guard is the only thing that makes sense, or the Army, or the Texas Rangers, or whoever the heck they brought in for it. And,
And I will tell you one other thing is
yeah,
that they would not have been surprised by a cartel group being in the range. If they were indeed bombing on it, they would not be surprised if the cartel was actually in the zone, in the battle zone. And I know that from experience. When I was a teenager, my brother and I had a three-wheeler, which can't even buy those anymore because they were so dangerous. But my brother and I had a three-wheeler. We lived in Alamogordo, New Mexico. And we would regularly take that three-wheeler, go up into the mountains and ride around, go straight up from our house up into the mountains and ride around the mountains. Well, one time we were up there and we were riding around in the mountains, and we realized we were about to run out of gas, and we had already used what was in our reserve tank that we carried with us. So we decided we're just going to cut straight down out of the mountains and go straight across the desert to the highway to see if we can make it to the gas station. Well, we did that. Well, what we didn't know was that the military at Holloman Air Force Base was doing training exercises right at the bottom of that mountain. And so we started driving. It took us less than 5 minutes of driving through that zone before we were surrounded by military personnel wanting to know what we were doing in the middle of their training. And it was a long conversation explaining why we were in the middle of their training. And so it's a little hard to believe that if they were doing bombing exercises, they wouldn't know exactly what was in that zone.
yeah, I thought that was, I mean, again, you had to suspend your reality part during the whole cartel and the military part and everything else. And it was a very good creative writing. Let's just put it that way in order to get to that point. But it does add a new wrinkle now because now you've got the military cartel, another death, and how's that going to fold into this whole thing? And so it's to me,
And it also goes to show that you need to pay attention to what people say because Taylor Sheridan has a tendency to foreshadow exactly what's fixing to happen.
yeah,
And
that's
so,
true.
what was the last thing that the governor said? Don't put me on the news. And then the National Guard kills a cartel member.
Exactly. So you're probably going to see a Starbucks built there, right? I
Yeah.
mean, Taylor Sheridan foreshadow. That was one of my favorite lines. Was build a Starbucks. I don't care what you do, just make sure you have a presence to scare away the cartel.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, and here's the thing: is that this actually is one of the issues with society today, is that just because you map it out or just because it's checkbox, 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 doesn't mean it's reality. That's why in the NFL they say that's why they play the games. I mean, yes, uh, uh, Deion Sanders in Colorado on paper should have beat BYU, but BYU came in and blew them right out. So, I mean, that's why they play the games. And with the oil and gas business, that's why they drill the wells, I guess. I mean, so I wrote down another part that I'm really curious on, your perspective, because when the attorneys and John Hamm and the families, when they started negotiating back and forth, and it went from what, 1 million to 3 million total. I think it went from
1.2 to 3.
yeah, 1.2 million total to 3 million total. So each family got a million instead of a quarter million or whatever it was, or 400,000. What's lost, and they did continue it through, which ended up putting John Hamm in the hospital with a heart attack, is that what's lost on that scene, because so many people focus on the victory of these grieving widows and the 1.2 million to 3 million, and the woke lawyer got her comeuppance and this and that, is how quickly an oil company can lose money.
Yeah.
Because that 1.2 million went to 3 million, and just like that, in a moment, that's what, 2.8 or 1.8 million that you weren't budgeting for, that you got to figure out how you're going to come up with. Is it going to come out of your bank account? Is insurance going to deal with it? Is my insurance going to drop me? Oh my goodness, my heart is about ready to explode. And yes, it did. And John Hamm ended up in the hospital. But that was what I actually took away from that attorney negotiation, where the three widows went from 1.2 to 3 million. What was your takeaway? And then also comment a little bit on the realities of the high risk, high reward cash business it is.
Yeah, I think that you're exactly right on that, and I think one of the biggest things that's going to be lost is even the 3 million is probably far less than what they would lose if it were to go to court, if it were to be adjudicated. Because once it went to court to be adjudicated, now you are bringing in the insurance. They talked about several of those things: not bringing in the insurance, not bringing in the lawyers, not bringing in the EPA and all these other organizations to look at all of the wells. Well, when you have a well blow up, I'm sorry, the EPA is coming in, OSHA's coming in. They're going to start looking at your other facilities. So I think that was kind of a threat that they were trying to avoid, that would have happened no matter what. That's something that would have happened no matter what. The insurance company, that's a little different, trying to get a payoff so that you don't have to go to adjudication, and it turned into way more than $3 million. That would actually, could potentially bankrupt the entire company. But yes, it is high risk, high reward. Anytime you talk about putting in a new well, anytime you talk about stripping a well, when you talk about working over a well, when you talk about employees that get hurt on the job, all of it is big money. There are no small bills in the oil and gas industry. And so that's where that high risk, high reward is, because when it comes in big numbers. And when it goes in big numbers as well.
The other part too, I want to go back to Billy Bob and the Army when they're kind of negotiating the Army itself and Billy Bob, and that's when he says, you guys build a Starbucks out here for all I care. Um, this really symbolizes the oil and gas industry, and the John Hamm 1.2 to 3 million he's got to figure out how to do. That's kind of the negative side of it, and there are some positive sides of it too, which is actually drilling the well. But that scene with Billy Bob Thornton and the Army just symbolized it, which is you have a simple goal. The details are complex as can be, but the goal is simple. I don't care if you build a Starbucks. You are here for deterrence. Go do. I don't care what else you do. You have one simple goal: deter the cartel. I don't care if you build a Starbucks. That was great when they were just asking, "Can we do this? Can we do that? Can we do that?" I don't, whatever. And then, so to me, that was really the oil and gas industry. One simple goal: drill the oil. It's just the details that are just complex as can be. And apparently the cartel can come out of nowhere and the army can bomb him. I mean, the reality is that there's so many ways that things can go wrong. And anyway, that's what I kind of took away from a little bit of this was that higher symbolism, if you will, that I try to view these episodes so I don't get upset when the wrench is the wrong way or yeah, the cartel's involved, and the blow up happens right away. If I get upset at all those things, man, it's not going to be an enjoyable time. So I try to view it with the dim glasses on, if you will. But what's your thought on that? The
Yeah.
simplistic goal with the complex details.
Yeah, I think the simplistic goal is always, to get the oil. That's what it is. That's where the money's made. It's what you're trying to do. Certainly from the oil and gas industry, you're trying to do that from the cheapest way that you possibly can, the easiest way that you possibly can. But I think that if you take the National Guard out of it and you replace that with a rancher that he's negotiating with to be able to do something on their a hostile rancher that's out there, that's one of the jobs of a landman. And I wish it was highlighted a little bit more, is that's really what they're good at, and that's what their job is. You have situations where you're moving onto people's land where the people own the land, they're working the land, but they don't have the mineral rights. So you're basically an invasive species on their land because everyone who's going to benefit from what you pull out of the ground, none of them live on the land that's there. And so I've seen situations where landmen have gone and made deals with farmers and ranchers. Hey, we'll build you a new road. We're going to put this well here, but we'll build you a new road to your house so that you have a better road to your house. Or we'll put in new gates for you so our trucks can get in, but we'll make nice gates for you to get in. And there is a lot of that negotiation that takes place to try and smooth things over, make things as easy as possible, make it as easy as possible to be able to fulfill the goal, which is to go out and drill for that precious resource that we are so dependent upon. And I think that that's something that it was highlighted a little bit in that scene with the National Guard, but that is what a landman does. A landman negotiates and figures out how to work with people. Like we said in the very first episode, what's their job? Secure the lease and manage the people. And they figure out a way to manage the people to accomplish that goal the easiest way possible.
Well, it was a sexual show again. This time they added the language with some imagery and the overall vibe. And there was a couple moments that were pretty in your face, a few that would have been bleeped on CBS or NBC or ABC. And then there was the flaring backdrop, which kind of infused some sexuality or romance or some sex appeal, if you will, into the flaring, which became the backdrop, the literal backdrop for an environmental debate. And here you've got the young quarterback doing the stereotypical I'm at an oil and gas event sound bites, and then you've got the young teenage girl that's doing the stereotypical Greta Thunberg sound bites, pretty much. So this is interesting for obviously for the industry, for a lot of perspectives to see which direction it goes. But for me, the whole flaring backdrop, I actually thought that was a net positive. That there was flaring and somewhat of I wasn't upset. I'll tell you what, it wasn't a map of the United States from the moon showing that North Dakota is lit up like a Christmas tree, in West Texas too. So anyway, what was your thought about the sexuality that was infused in this episode, and then the slow movement into the flaring part of it? So go ahead.
So I'm going to go backwards on you on that. I'm going to go with the
Yeah,
flaring first, and then we'll come back to the other because the flaring was one of those scenes again where I've said over and over and over, Taylor Sheridan's trying to play both sides.
absolutely on this
He's
one. Holy crap.
absolutely trying to play both sides, and one, they say that they're going to a refinery that just put in a new pond and has a flare on it. I don't know of any refinery that you would be able to get into their ponds and go swimming in their ponds next to the flare.
By the way, time out for a second.
Yeah.
Do people swim in those? Like,
That was my second point. My second point was I've been around a lot of those tanks that are dug out of the ground. It's nothing but a mud pit.
I
You
was gonna say it's not like
yeah,
a pool.
no, it's not like a pool. It's a mud pit. And why anyone that knows anything about the oil industry would ever want to go swimming in one with his girlfriend is beyond me from the beginning.
And so
Uh,
some people out there watching, it would kind of be akin to going back and swimming in like a cattle stock pond. That's mostly more cattle dung and
yep,
urine. It
yep.
would be very similar. That it would probably be full of mud and just crap, I guess, because that water is being used for fracking. It's not being used for drinking water. I mean, so it's not like they care what. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead. So,
And it's
some of it's
recycled water.
recycled too. So
Recycled water. It's
yeah,
not
a
even
lot of it's
not even fresh
recycled.
water. It's recycled water.
Oof.
So, I think that but that whole scene it looked cool, but it was completely unbelievable. And if you actually tried to do that, it'd be miserable. And the second part was she asked, why is the flare there? And he says, well, we have to flare off the gas because if we don't, it'll build up and it will explode. Well, that's generally not why you flare gas. At a refinery, yes, you have a flare going to make sure that there's no contaminants that go into the air if a valve bust, or if you have a breakdown somewhere, it'll burn off anything before it goes into the environment. That's why the flare's there. But out on an oil well, which that's what this looked like. It looked like a tank that was out by an oil well. The flare that's there, usually when those flares are there, it's because natural gas prices are so low and there's not a natural gas pipeline anywhere close to it. So you can't connect it because that's natural gas. That's a resource. And if you're able to connect to a pipeline and ship that down the way, then you can actually make money off of it. But there's been many times in recent history where natural gas prices have been depressed and they've been so low that by the time you send a truck out to load up the natural gas and then take that truck and deliver it to a delivery station, a transfer station, and you sell it, you're actually losing money. It costs you more to haul it off than it does to burn it off and lose the resource. And so most of those flares that are out there, because there is some natural gas being produced, but it's not enough to put up a delivery system to be able to make money off of it. And so you flare off the gas to keep methane, ethane, butane, and propane from flaring into the environment. And that's where most of those flares are taking place. When the price of natural gas goes up, you see a lot of those flares go down because now it's worth putting in a tank and storing it and shipping it off. And so that whole thing was a little bit unbelievable, but I think their conversation is what's most important because again, playing both sides of it. And I'm going to say that both of them were Greta at one point in that conversation, because it starts out, she starts talking out about how that's what's destroying the environment. So that's what people think about when it's destroying the environment. And that is a pretty iconic image. It's kind of like when people see an image of or drive by a refinery and they see all of the smoke that's around the refinery. Well, if it's white and it's coming off the refinery, it's not smoke. It's vapor. It's water vapor that's coming off because we use a lot of water to cool the system as it's being refined and processed through that refinery, and that water gives off water vapor, which is the white smoke. If it turns black, that's bad, and that's not good. And so when you see the flare and black smoke's coming out of the flare, you know you have a problem. But if you see white smoke everywhere, that's actually water vapor, and that is rising off of that. So a lot of times it's misunderstanding what it is that you're actually seeing. The flare's better than the methane, ethane, propane, and butane that are being released into the environment. But she starts out and says, that's what people are looking at, why we're destroying the environment. Then he gives a semi-good presentation about how it's not destroying the environment. It's not as bad as people say it is. And have you looked at lithium, and have you looked at windmills, and have you looked at what it takes those aren't very environmentally conscious or environmentally friendly either. And so he kind of wins the argument with her, and she kind of comes along to his side, and she's kind of leaning towards him. And then he comes back and he says, the biggest threat to the environment is us, humans. we're the biggest threat to the environment. Well, that's Greta in a nutshell right there. That is exactly what she would say. And that's what a lot of people would say. I went and spoke at a college to an environmental science class. I was supposed to do an hour and a half presentation to this environmental science class. I got about 45 minutes into it, and I could see by the looks on their faces that we weren't getting anywhere. So I stopped the conversation and I said, let's go into Q&A, and maybe we can make it more, tie it in a little bit more to what you're actually thinking right now. Immediately, this class, by the way, was supposed to be filled with 10 environmental science students, and that was it. Well, there was 10 environmental science students, but there was at least that many more professors that came in to sit in the class because they heard that I was coming. So immediately a professor raises his hand. He stands up and he says, well, first of all, I want to say that you're extremely effective in sharing your propaganda. And that's how he started. You're extremely effective in sharing your propaganda. And so I said, I'm going to stop you right there, and I'll just say, thank you. Now, what's your question? And then we went to the question. And for the next hour, I sat there and just answered questions back and forth. It wasn't like what you hear on the news media where everyone's yelling and arguing back and forth. One person would make a statement or ask a question. I would respond, and we'd move on. And we did that for an hour, going through those different things. But I finally, about 45 minutes into the Q&A, I stopped everybody for just a second. I said, can I make an observation? The observation that I want to make is this. We're not disagreeing on the data. We're not disagreeing on the data, but we are disagreeing on the conclusions of the data. And I have to ask why that is. And I think why that is simply comes down to this. When you use the word environment, you're talking about everything that exists in the world except humans. And when I use the word environment, I'm talking about everything that exists in the world, including humans. And I think that's the difference in the conclusions that we're coming to. And everyone in the room agreed with me that yes, that's the difference. And so I think it is very key when that statement was made, humans are the worst threat to the environment. That is the core of environmental differences. Do you see humanity as a parasite that is destroying the environment, or do you see humanity as part of the environment that must be considered as well as everything else that's in the environment? And I think that that is really an important point that we have to make in the oil industry, that the oil industry makes life better for humans. It gives us the resources that protect us from the environment. And so I think that is a key statement that I don't want to miss in this show.
So one of the things that I wrote down is that when he was giving his presentation, if you will, when he was talking about the lithium and the windmills and everything, she didn't agree with him right away. In fact, the first thing that she said was, "Oh, you're one of those."
Yeah.
And I thought, boy, that's just dead on right there, because that is one of the biggest issues that the oil and gas industry has been fighting, which is, doesn't matter how many facts you spout at them. It's always going to come back to emotion over fact. Oh, you're one of those. Oh, you don't want to save the planet. Oh, your facts don't save the planet. These facts do. And it's really almost like a state-sponsored shaming. At the end of the day, I saw the cigarette industry go through it, and the oil and gas industry, a lot of the same template that they publicly shamed the tobacco industry with, as they're using it on coal and oil and gas. And one of those, that is a common Kim Kardashian dismissal that the industry has been hearing for a long time. And it, to me, that was the takeaway for the industry. That if I'm with the oil and gas industry and I'm in the public relations department, that to me is the number one part of the whole show, is that no matter how many facts you point at them and how chiseled your body is, you're still going to get dismissed as, oh, you're one of those. Mm-hmm. And Warren, what are your thoughts on that? Because to me, like I said, I think that the industry should pay attention to that, because I think that is way more real than the quick 5 seconds that demonstrated in the show.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right on that. There's a tremendous amount of public shaming. I think I've shared on this show before how I spoke in Colorado. And when I got done speaking in Colorado, I had a woman that came up to me and said that, this is the first time in 20 years of me working in this industry that I've been proud of the job that I do. I've been proud of the industry that I work in. And so that shaming comes down to our employees, and it really impacts how we're able to communicate, how we're able to interact within our own communities, how we feel about our own jobs. And I think that that is very much a ploy that is used by those who are against the oil and gas industry, the fossil fuel industry, is that public shaming element that's taking place there. And that's something that we need to be careful about. And one of the things that I've been actively working on for years now is uh, uh, changing the conversation about the oil and gas industry, because the conversations that we start about the oil and gas industry are always built around a frame. And that frame is here's the world we live in. It is what it is. Now, where's the future going to go? And you have to admit, if you want to be a part of the conversation, that you're bad for the environment. And if you can't start with those two things, then you're one of those people. You're one of those people that we can't talk with, that we can't reason with. And so it's a way of setting up the frame that sets up our industry to lose the conversation every single time. And that's one of the reasons I've been really working to recreate that frame and break that frame and say, no, 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 you can't start there. You can't start with where the world is. You have to start to how did we get to this world? How did we get to this point? How did we get to where we have lifestyles the way that we had them? It is not possible without the oil and gas industry. The oil and gas industry is essential to the lifestyle that we live today, the enjoyment that we have, the comfort that we have, the safety that we have. And you have to include that as part of the conversation. Are there negative elements of the oil and gas industry? Yes. Are there emissions that we need to be concerned about and continue to work on to reduce? Yes. Are there environmental issues that we need to take care of and that we need to do better jobs at? Yes. But you can't start with those. You have to start with where did we come from? How did we get where we are today? And how valuable is the oil industry to the lifestyle we have today? That's the frame we have to have the conversation in, because without that, you got people that think that, hey, that's got to make a choice whether I want that switch over there to turn on because from a windmill or from a polluting oil and gas well. And in their minds, they think there's no difference. But you take the oil out of it and all you have is the windmill, then you lose tremendous number of products, over 6,000 raw materials that are used to make products every single day. You lose the lifestyle that we have. You lose the comfort, the safety, all of that, because there's nothing there to replace it with. And so we have to recreate that frame that begins with talking about the benefits that have got us here. And then I'm more than happy to talk about the negative aspects and the issues of the oil and gas industry. But I'm only going to talk about those if you're willing to admit that we would not have the lifestyle we have today without the oil and gas industry. If you can't admit that, then you're the one that's being unreasonable.
John Hamm's character ends up in the hospital, and here's a prediction that you made that appears to be coming correct, which is Demi Moore is stepping in to become the CEO. Well, John Hamm recovers from his 5th heart attack. So he starts the episode with meeting with the governor, negotiating a deal with the National Guard or the Texas National Guard, losing $1.8 million more in a settlement that he wasn't counting on, finding out that it was his own employee that was representing as the settlement arbitrator for the 3 widowed, and he ends up in the hospital, 5th heart attack. So great job by Taylor Sheridan by showing that this is a typical day in a CEO's schedule, and in the oil and gas industry or any industry pretty much, when you're at that level and you're dealing with billions and millions of dollars, this is the type of stuff that goes back and forth, and eventually the stress catches up to you. That was my takeaway, Warren, besides the fact that your prediction seems to be correct that Demi Moore is going to be stepping in as the new CEO.
Well, I think she's going to step into a greater role. There's no doubt about it. I mean, she went to Tommy and she told Tommy, if you need anything, you call me. You do not call him. You call me. Obviously, that shows that at least for a time, she's going to take the reins. And I think I'm really curious what kind of character we're going to get out of Demi Moore because they haven't really played her hand one way or the other at this point. And so, is she going to be the tyrant or is she going to be the compassionate CEO? I don't think so. I think she's going to be more of the tyrant that's going to be even worse, more of a tyrant than he is when it comes to running the company. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of where that goes. But I thought what was really realistic is, when you're around a lot of people that are power brokers, there are people that do that. Here he is having a heart attack in the hospital on the gurney, and he's on the phone talking to Tommy, trying to take care of one more deal until his wife takes the phone away from him. I have seen that multiple times. It's hard for people who are passionate about their job, who are passionate about what they do, for them to ever set down the phone to walk away. We saw that when he was watching his daughter run at TCU earlier in the series. Now you see it with him having a heart attack on the hospital gurney. And so I thought that was a pretty realistic to some of the scenes I've seen where you look at people and just say, put the phone down. That's not a decision that has to be made right now. Forget about it.
I think you're going to be right with Demi Moore. I think she's going to make John Hamm look like the choir boy by the time she's done. I also do think that from last episode, I was thinking a little bit more about it, how I mentioned that I think that the daughter's going to be at the receiving end of the cartel. I think she's going to get kidnapped. I think that's going to be probably the cliffhanger at the end of season 1 is that she'll probably end up getting kidnapped. Well, it seems like they're taking the things that have happened one time in history and turning it into a storyline into, oh, the Charles Lindbergh baby got kidnapped. Let's throw it in there in the oil and gas industry. Sure, why not? It happened in history. People will remember it, sure. But that's good storytelling, in Hollywood type of a thing. You got to have a story arc. Um, the other part that I thought was pretty real, if I'm going to put on my reality hat, is when Billy Bob Thornton basically rattled off the supply chain, how we save money by going through the benefits and pros and cons and the ups and downs of the supply chain. There was a little bit more in there, but basically that's what I took away from that speech where him and the attorney got into it, where he's so focused on trying to save money on pipes and pumps and all these different things that we don't ever waste an ounce of energy trying to screw over one of our employees. So we focus on trying to screw over the tangible products. The intangibles, no, we don't waste time on that. I mean, there's ethics involved, there's morals involved. So I thought actually the oil and gas industry looked good there. That when they're trying to talk about how they're saving money, it's ruthless competition in the marketplace. It's not human rights. That was my takeaway from the how we save money speech. How about you, Warren?
No, I think that pretty much summed up the oil and gas industry right there. I mean, you talk to producers out there, they'll tell you, you want to buy when the price is low and sell when the price is high. And, but to a large degree, that speech that he was talking about is a lot like giving stock market advice. I mean, the stock market's easy. You buy when the stock's low and you sell when the stock's high. That's pretty easy. The problem is figuring out when that is. When is the price low? Because it can always go lower. And when is it high? Because it can always drop and it can always go higher. And so figuring that out takes a lot of specialty expertise that goes along with it. Certainly one of the ways that great oil and gas companies are able to excel, expand, and become bigger than they are today is by manipulating those markets in the right way where they do buy when the price is cheap, sell when the price is high. It's hard to hit those highs and lows just like it is in the stock market. And right now, in our industry, especially over the past 2 years, you've seen energy prices have gone up. It used to be that people would say, hey, if you're making $70 a barrel oil, then that's plenty of money. In fact, in this show, they've said that if you make $70 a barrel oil, that's about the right price where we can continue drilling, we can continue exploring. That's not really so much the case anymore. And it's not the case because a lot of those supplies that he was talking about, the pipe, the steel, the labor, the valves and all of that stuff has increased in cost so dramatically that $70 is not the same $70 it was 4 years ago. It's not, the profit margin is not anywhere close to where it was 4 years ago. So that's kind of shaking up a little bit of the oil industry on that side of it, where producers are having to get creative on when they're buying supplies, where they're buying supplies, how they're buying supplies to keep the company running, because the oil price has not responded to the increased cost that is in the supplies to be able to extract it.
So we had another death, this time by the U.S. Army. We talked about that earlier, and it just again shows more of the complexity of the anything can go wrong on any given day. And yeah, it's the cartel and the U.S. Army and bombs and Landman, but in reality, it could be the sage beetle or lizard. I mean, it could be an environmentalist. It could be a number of different things that this show hasn't even come close to touching on. Season two could be, like I said, could be about the sage lizard. I mean, that could get extremely interesting. Then you start talking about some of the Indian burial grounds where the archaeologists have to come in, and so there's so many different ways that things can go wrong, and so
Well, in West Texas, you're talking about the prairie chicken.
is it prairie chicken? Yeah, I
Prairie
imagine.
chickens, prairie chicken's been a huge issue in West Texas and up here in Kansas for the past decade.
Is that the
And
sage grouse? Is that the same as the sage
yeah,
grouse?
yeah,
Okay, because up here, that
yeah.
sage grouse has done more economic impact than anything else, than any flood or any COVID. That sage grouse, man. And one year there was so many they actually had a hunting season, and it was still being protected like it was, the last condor on the planet or dodo bird. I forget
Well,
the.
you're exactly right when you talk about those negotiations and how that happens, because at one point in time, it was pushed through here where there was an organization that was set up to manage the protection of the prairie chicken here in Kansas. And if you wanted to drill a well, then you had to bond it and you had to put a certain amount of money into this fund for the protection of the prairie chicken so that you could go drill a well. But the key is you couldn't drill the well until the nonprofit organization that got the money spent the money in order to protect the prairie chicken. So what does the environmental group do? Just don't spend the money. If you don't spend the money, you can't ever drill the well. And so it became a huge issue here in Kansas for quite a while. It continues to be an issue here in Kansas. So not quite as dire as it was, but it continues to be an issue here in Kansas. But you're exactly right. Anything like that generally is far more devastating to the oil and gas industry than the cartel is.
So there's many more storylines to come, folks, depending on, and apparently the show's doing very well. It's the most streamed show on Paramount right now, as far as the news releases say, and the updates I get from Paramount. Of course, we do have a content partnership with Paramount, specifically here for Landman, as we're talking about some different shows. Warren Martin, our guest, our oil man, reacting and reviewing. So as we wrap up here, Warren, overall, I still think that it's a positive for the industry, and the music, it starts off and the music that they play. This is something I pay attention to in almost, in fact, if you go to This Week in Energy, we're very much into music. We have singer-songwriters on because music generally gives people a positive feeling. It gives it positive emotion, and especially when they're upbeat songs. And so when they're showing the oil and gas rigs and they're showing some of the scenes, and you've got some great music going and some good soundtrack, um, that really helps set the tone. And really, until I see that go a different way, where it's some horror movie, Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween music, I think that the majority is still going to walk away feeling good about oil and gas versus feeling bad. Although there is, complexities, and he's playing it both ways. Again, I think it's a net positive for the industry. How about you?
Yeah, I'll pull a song for you. Just that one of after the lawyer was talking with Cooper about the negotiation over the payout for the families. The musical transition was a song, and the line of the song said, "Pretty good at crossing over those lines." And that was so. Again, I'm with you there. I think the music selection is incredible, but I will want to point out one thing with that is right before that music starts. Um, Cooper is talking about, to the lawyer, and when he's talking to the lawyer, he talks about how these wells, he's noticed these wells, and those wells have been unmonitored in for years. They've
Hmm.
been unmonitored for years, and you don't want anyone going out there and checking on them. And again, I think that that is a misconception of the oil and gas industry. Every well in the oil industry has to be checked. Someone has to visually be there and look at that well every single day. They have pumpers that go to every single well, check every single well every single day. Now, is there wells that have not been taken care of? Is there wells that need some help and are dilapidated a little? Yes, that happens. But the fact that wells are unmonitored is definitely a misnomer. And the last thing that I'll end on is I'll end with what happened at the retirement home when Angela goes to the retirement
Oh
home. Her
yeah.
daughter goes to the retirement home, and I I think I think it's pointing to something that actually is in the oil and gas industry, but is really out of proportion with what actually happens in the oil and gas industry. And in that, you see a moment of humanity where you have these people who are used to living the high life that go in and see those people who are not able to do what they want to do, can't get out, can't do anything, and they feel sorry for them. So they're conducting some philanthropy to try and bring excitement, bring fun, bring those things in. And I think that it's trying to bring that human touch to it, but that's a huge part of the oil and gas industry. You come here to Kansas, you can go into Wichita, you can go into just about any nonprofit you want to go into of the arts of the or whatever nonprofit you want to go in. If you start looking at the names on the donor boards that are up there, I guarantee you, almost every single one of those nonprofits, you're going to find oil and gas producers that are named on those boards. They don't put their oil company up there, they put their name up there because they're the ones who are giving to the organization. But oil has, to a large degree, built the city of Wichita. Certainly, oil has built Midland and Odessa. And I think one of the things that is often lost is the fact that the oil and gas industry is a highly philanthropic organization, philanthropic, there we go, philanthropic organization that really does support the communities that they're involved in. And I know that's true here in Kansas, where we're almost completely independent oil and gas companies, where the producers live in the towns that they work in. They go to the same churches, the same schools, they go to the same restaurants, and they care about the communities in which they live. And I've worked down in Midland, and while there's larger oil companies that are more corporate driven, most of the oil companies, like the refinery that's right here in the city that I work in, they have an entire team that's made up of workers, just staff members, that employees that work at the refinery, and they decide how the money is going to be given to the local community because they're of the local community. That's a huge part of the oil and gas industry, is that we are an industry that does invest. We do diversify and help start other companies. In fact, if you look at every single major advancement, whether you want to look at the car explosion, the transportation explosion that took place back in the 50s, you want to look at the housing boom, the tech boom, you can look at just about any major advancement. It was generally preceded by an advancement in the oil and gas industry, because what do oil and gas companies do to protect themselves from that high risk, high reward? They diversify. they invest in other companies and they invest in their communities and they give. They donate a lot.
I'm glad you brought up the Allie Larder character because I did have her in my notes, but it was basically uh, she kind of had the episode off, but they wanted to make sure that you knew that she was a hot mess. They had this train wreck of a relationship, but she's got a heart of gold. And so it's like she had like maybe 10 minutes or 5 to 8 minutes of time total, but they kept, you know, everything they built up to, they maintained. And that is so, and you know what? I'll tell you what, I'll go a little bit into the industry here because, you know, I all but 3 years of my professional life, I've been an entrepreneur. And the one thing that I can say, surviving, I don't know, 5 to 8 recessions, the 2009 one got me, but the rest of them, I was able to negotiate my way through and navigate my way through. Um, and see, now I totally lost my train of thought here where I was going with this with Allie. Okay, so Allie Larder was talking about the hot mess that she was, and what was I talking about, Warren?
I have no idea where you're going with that, but it was a good thought. I believe.
It was a fantastic thought, and I can't. Oh, maintaining momentum. There we go.
Okay.
So it's very easy to get momentum. Yeah, some people might be hard, but you know what? You can always buy it. You can keep it going, and you know it's a hype and this and that. Maintaining momentum is so much harder than getting it, and that's what they did in this episode with her. Is that they were able to maintain and even advance a little bit, which is even harder to do. They maintained and advanced everything that they've built up with Allie Larder this whole time. Sorry, it's late, folks. Here, we had a Vikings game that went down to the wire today. I got a little. I don't know. Did you catch any football today, by the way, Warren?
I did not. I did not
Oh,
catch any football today.
well, see now the Vikings and Lions are going to be going into next week for the championship. And by the way, folks, it's you know, end of day on Sunday here as we're getting our deals done. So I had a little bit of a brain out of nowhere, but um, your thoughts on just, you know, maintaining momentum, because building momentum has its own challenges, but in today's day and age where you can, you know, quick buy the flash in the pan and you can get some quick momentum a lot quicker than the old days, maintaining it is so much harder, and you almost can't buy it. It'll bankrupt you trying to maintain it that way. And so figuring out those strategies and figuring out how to navigate, that's what's hard about oil and gas is maintaining that momentum, especially when you got price fluctuations and increases in gas prices and supply chain issues and attorneys and accidents and so many ways to disrupt your momentum. So to me, that was my takeaway from Allie Larder's character, was that the producers and storyboard people did a fantastic job maintaining everything that they've built up with her character, even advancing it a little bit, because the beginning part we couldn't air that on any of the major stations. They would have had to bleep out half of that beginning part.
Yeah.
You know, the weekend sex versus weekday sex, Warren. But anyway, what do you think about that momentum, trying to maintain and create it? Go ahead.
So when I go into a company and I do leadership training with the company, we call it maintaining the pipeline. And it's, you know, it's one of there's really two things that I talk with people about success. The easiest time to quit is after you have a success. When you succeed at something, that's usually the easiest time to quit, because you did it. Now you can relax and you can rest. And then you realize, uh-oh, nothing else is coming. And so that's where the pipeline comes in, is when you start to accomplish something, when you start to create something, when you start to make a product, we sell a product, you know, go out and drill oil wells, you're putting something in the pipeline. And it's really critical to manage that, whatever you put in the pipeline, to manage it all the way through the pipeline until it comes out as a success on the other end of the pipeline. But the whole time you're managing that going through the pipeline, you've got to constantly be putting more and more into the pipeline, so that when it comes out, you don't have to go back and take a break and restart the whole process over to get it flowing again, because that's what destroys companies. That's what destroys initiatives. That's what destroys campaigns, is you have to constantly be putting something into the pipeline. And that's why when you talk with oil and gas producers, the ones that are doing it, the ones that are doing it well, they're always working on a deal. They're always working on something to put into the pipeline so that they have something at every stage of the pipeline, so you have a consistent payout on the other end. And I think that's a lot of times what people neglect, or a lot of times where they have a hard time crossing over into truly being successful, is because they have a limited success, and then they lose momentum because they weren't continuing to put something in the pipeline. And so I think that's a key for anybody in any industry, any career, whatever it is that you do. Be sure that you're continuing to put something in the pipeline so it doesn't dry up.
So as we're foreshadowing here, as we round or wind down today's reaction review with Warren Martin, got my Pinky in the Brain shirt on here.
Which one am I?
Well, we'll call you the Brain. I'll be Pinky. Okay, sure, why not? So what do we got? We have some foreshadowing. Demi Moore taking over the company. Is she going to be more ruthless than John Hamm? I believe that the daughter is probably going to get kidnapped by the cartel. There was some kind of foreshadowing from 2 episodes ago, which still needs to come to fruition, where it looked like the cartel was spying on the daughter when she was out at that party. And your foreshadowing about the governor is probably going to end up on the news now because of this U.S. Army or National Guard or Texas Rangers deal that happened out there with the cartel death. So lots of storylines, 2 episodes left. Obviously, they're not going to wrap up everything here. And we still have lots to come. So any final thoughts there?
No, I think that we've kind of covered most of it. I do think that there's a lot still left to be seen. And I think that, like you say, I think it's a net positive for the industry as a whole, because people are talking about it. People are talking about it and people are watching it. And that's, for me, that's the most important thing, is because my entire passion is to change the conversation about the oil and gas industry. You can't change it unless you have the conversation. So that's a net positive for us.
And Billy Bob Thornton is up for some awards I've seen, whether it's the Golden Globes or the Emmys or whatever it might be. So the show itself is going to be up for some awards. Oh, I had one more prediction, I guess, foreshadowing here. I think that they're actually going to set up the wife, the hot mess trade wreck of a wife with the heart of gold, to kind of be that nonprofit vein that you're talking about, where I think that she's actually going to be kind of that storyline going forward for the industry, where she'll step in and solve a problem for her husband by doing some of this philanthropic nonprofit community outreach is really would probably be the correct way to put it, because whether it's a gun shoot or a golf event or some of these other industry fundraisers that they do. So that's my prediction with her character, is that they'll fold her in that way, in some way or another. She'd be perfect for it. So, well, Warren, Kansas strong, and we'll be back next week with the review, episode 9. 2 episodes left. All right, sir. Thank you much. We'll see you next week.
Sounds great. Thank you.